Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, A Collaborative Approach to Standards Implementation Leveraging Partnerships. My name is Eric Hoyer. I'm an Education Policy Analyst here at CSBA, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. Before we get started, I want to make a few quick announcements. If at any time you are having technical issues, please type your issue in the questions area of your GoToWebinar dashboard located on the right side of your screen. If you don't see the webinar dashboard, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, A Collaborative Approach to Standards Implementation Leveraging Partnerships. My name is Eric Hoyer. I'm an Education Policy Analyst here at CSBA, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. And right now, I'd like to turn it over to Jane Steinkamp of the San Joaquin County Office of Education.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're very excited to be able to present to you on behalf of the NGSS Collaborative. And our story today is called Aligning the Planets, which is the story of the NGSS Collaborative. And on the line with me, we have members representing our Collaborative Executive Committee, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So as Eric said, I'm Jane Steinkamp from the San Joaquin County Office of Education, and my role on the collaborative is to represent CIS, the Curriculum Instruction Steering Committee, under Intercessor, which is the County Superintendent's Organization. Maria?
Maria Simani, I'm the Executive Director of the California Science Project, a professional development network in California. Kathy?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Kathy Dirana. I am the statewide director for the K12 Alliance at West Ed. Like CSP, we are a professional development network working in the state in both math and science education.
And I'm Laura Henriquez. I'm a professor of science education at Cal State Long Beach, but my role in the collaborative as representing the California Science Teachers Association, I was the president of CSTA when we started playing together, and so I've remained on the executive committee since then.
Okay, and if we'll go to the next slide, Eric.
So we wanted to share this slide with you because we think it's a wonderful summary of what actually happened in this story of the NGSS Collaborative, where a small group of thoughtful, committed people came together to change the world, our world of science education in the state of California. And we're excited to share with you our story. Next slide.
Laura?
Yep, so this really is the planets aligning. Not that long ago, all of our organizations did lots of really good stuff, but tended to do it in isolation. And it really worked out nicely for the timing of when the California NGSS were adopted, that the four of us on the phone call were all heavily involved in our own organizations. We had existing relationships of respect and working together on smaller projects, and we knew that the lift of implementing NGSS was going to be bigger than any of us could do. And so we were all spinning alone in our own little universe, wanting to make a difference. And planets all lined up, so we were able to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
next slide.
And oh, one last thing, can you go back? I'm sorry. The one partner that's not on the phone call with us right now is the California Department of Education, and all of us were involved in the adoption of the standards and looking at the standards as part of the science expert panel, and that was in conjunction with the California Department of Education. And so they are a partner in this work as well.
Yeah, so in these next slides, we wanted to show you the process that we have been following in the creation of the support system for the California in the adoption and implementation of the next generation science standards, because our collaborative has always followed the national process, and that led to the development of the next generation science standards in 2013. But our interest really was piqued in 2011 when this broad document labeled in phase 1 was created. That was the framework for K12 science education that was really bringing together over 2 decades of research on how people learn. And overall in California, our work was based on those 90s, 2000 work, like how people learn. But only with the next generation science standards, finally California was able to adopt a document that and standards that was really representative of a philosophy of learning and teaching that was based on research and how students learn from their own perspective. So next slide gives you a better idea of where California was positioned, because California was one of the original 26 lead states that were developing and reviewing the next generation science standards. And we came together well before California made an adoption move on the standards. And in particular, our professional organization, the California Science Teacher Association, invited a collective group of similar thinker people to discuss on what is the best approach for the adoption of the NGSS in California, and also how to continue supporting the process of implementation. With the support of the Chevron and the Bechtel Foundation, Kathy might correct me on that, but the Department of Education assembled a science expert panel that started convening in the spring of 2013, and finally this science expert panel, to which all of us are member of, allowed the California to adopt the next generation science standards in 2013, and also making the recommendation for the preferred integrated model for middle school of the same year.
And I just want to add one thing here. When you look at the third bullet here, that CSTA invites players to come to a think tank to discuss how to address the NGSS. Really, a part of that was, I think, from lessons learned across the state of California in terms of the math adoption, where there was not enough pre-work done really prior to districts adopting math and the state of California, adopting the framework and implementing it. We really wanted to have conversations around those shifts that were so significant in the NGSS, and to get that conversation broadly spread across the state, so that when it was time for adoption, people weren't learning how new and different NGSS was, like they had to do with math. It really put the state, I think, a little bit behind when, in looking at the way the math adoption took place. Okay, next slide. Kathy?
So traditionally, what would have happened once the standards were adopted is the state would not have done a rollout until a framework was in place. And yet we knew in the time frame, the science framework was still going to be a couple of years out. And so the spinning people in the slide that Laura explained were all together at a meeting in Sacramento and said, we can't wait this long. We have got to figure out a way that we can actually get the message out, as Jane was just talking about, so that more people would have a sense of these shifts and really recognize how long it will take for the implementation to take place. So if you can look at this artifact, it was November 20th, 2013. We all hiked over to the West Ed offices and just really sat down and said, if we were to provide professional development, what might this look like and how might we be able to do this? So the next slide, again, are just some artifacts from that meeting. Basically what happened is Phil LaFontaine, who was the science coordinator at the California Department of Education, had some funding from Chevron that he thought he could use to help support this idea. So a bunch of people that were at that meeting sat down and thought about what might this look like, and you can kind of see that in that web visual about different sessions that we thought were important. Things like how do we talk about integration both at middle school and at the K-5 level with English language arts and math? How do we make sure that administrators are involved? What does an NGSS lesson even look like and how different it might look than what teachers were used to doing? Grounding people in what the basic tenets of NGSS were all about. So those were our ideas. And our basic game plan was that we would have people come together representing the different agencies who would be the module writers. And so each of the agencies, as you can see, nominated 3 or 4 people to come to a meeting in January where we started the actual writing of these materials. As we were doing this, we did not have a mechanism for dissemination. In fact, we were thinking like, so we'll write these, but who's going to really host these? The recommendation was that the county offices needed to take this on as something that they did. They were the formal structure in the state of California. It would be a wonderful way to have them involved. And we proposed that there would be 7 different county offices that might decide to help host these. Yet we had no way of making that happen because at that time, CISC was not on this list of people. And so we brought our issues to Jane and CISC and said, how might CISC help encourage the county offices to actually become part of this movement and actually host these? Jane, do you have the next slide?
I do. And so the next slide really shows how the planets were no longer spinning out on their own any longer, and where everyone came together for a common goal of standards implementation. So you can see the bullets: the K12 Alliance, Intercessor, CDE, California Science Project, California Science Teachers Association, and then the county offices of education. And really that was probably one of the biggest hurdles, was having partners at the county offices who initially, when we did this work, were promised nothing. I mean, there was no way for us to fund the rollouts. There was no way for us to fund the work that they were doing, the clerical support that they provided, the facilities that they provided. And yet there were, as you can see in the previous slide, a number of county offices that said, yes, let's do this, and let's make this a priority. And that's when things really started to connect together. And we really had that conversation around the fact that this work is bigger than any one organization can do on its own, and we have to work as partners for the good of the students in the state of California. The next slide is Maria's.
Yeah. So what you see in these slides is the beginning of our adventure. That is the flyer for the very first rollout that we hosted in San Joaquin County in February of 2015. We were ambitious in wanting to host a 2-day event, but we knew that in order to really make people think critically about the opportunities with the next generation science standards and also the challenges of tackling such an ambitious type of standards, we needed participants divided by grade band. We wanted to have administrators being engaged in a very thoughtful way, using their lens as administrators for supporting the teachers. And these honestly were 2 very long days of learning and collaboration across all our participants. And we have not moved away from this model since the very first one in 2015.
Next is Laura.
So after that first one that went so well, we sold out in all of our locations. We decided, all right, we started to raise awareness. Then we have to transition to implementation, and then we need to keep building. So the work was not done with 2 days of professional development. One of the key ideas underpinning all of this work was we wanted to be sure that everywhere across the state had access to the same high quality professional development. We didn't want teachers in far-flung counties not to have the same opportunities that somebody in a large metropolitan area had. And so these rollouts, the 2-day workshops, are consistent, using the same materials, the same scripts, the same activities all throughout the state. And then county offices have access to all of that and may offer it beyond the times that they offer it as an official rollout. So we've done 4 rollouts. 1.5 was sort of a catch-up. We realized we had the early adopters and the trailblazers who started with rollouts 1, 2, and 3, but now there was an awareness at the district levels and more people wanted to get involved. And while we had moved on to starting to think about the California framework, which had recently been adopted, there were people that needed to be back at the beginning stages. So rollout 1.5, excuse me, rollout 1.5 is sort of the best of 1 through 3 and a catch up for people who had not attended rollouts and needed to get brought up to speed. We've done niche sorts of rollouts where there was a high school summit that really looked at some piloted high schools that had piloted and done some pretty exciting things and helping high schools think about what science would look like in NGSS land at the high school level. As Maria said, all of our rollouts do have grade specific lessons and learning experiences. And we think that that is really important so that teachers and teacher leaders see something that's applicable for their grade band and don't have to make huge leaps to modify what they're learning and bringing back to their own classrooms. Our latest rollout is about to start. It's around environmental literacy. And so those will be happening this fall. We've used that same rollout model for what you'll see is rollout 5, which is the toolkit for instructional materials evaluation. And this was a training that we did for all the county office leaders so that they could then do adoption workshops back at their home sites and for the districts in their area. Follows the same model though of module writers, sessions get vetted, there's people that read behind. It's a very thoughtful, deliberative process to help develop really high quality professional development for our educators. And it's teachers, it's coaches, it's TOSAs, and it's administrators. So it's educators broadly. So far, we've had over 8,200 people attend, and we're still going.
And I think too, one of the things I'd like to point out here is just the rollout 4 and the rollout 5 were really extraordinary, one of first of their kind opportunities in that the California frameworks are typically only done as a rollout by the California Department of Education, but because of the relationship that we've established as a collaborative, and one of the partners on that collaborative being the California Department of Education, it was really exciting for us that we were able to do the California Science Framework rollout in our professional development model, as opposed to just PowerPoints, kind of death by PowerPoint going through the framework, PowerPoint slide by PowerPoint slide. This was really an interactive professional development opportunity over a 2-day period. And the same goes with the toolkit for instructional materials. Typically, the CISC is the organization, the Curriculum Instruction Steering Committee is the organization that creates the toolkits for instructional materials for any of the content areas. But in this case, again, because of the relationships that we've built, we were excited that CISC allowed the collaborative to be in charge of creating the instructional materials evaluation, which really made it, again, a professional development model, as opposed to just a checklist of items that you're looking for. While people were looking at what materials they wanted to use, they were actually learning about the NGSS and the shifts in the NGSS. So it was exciting. The next one is the NGSS Collaborative Organization. So just to let you know that we have a very formal process by which we make decisions and develop rollouts and implement the work that we're doing. So the executive committee consists of one partner from CSP, CSTA, the K12 Alliance at West Ed, CDE, and the Curriculum Instruction Steering Committee. So those of us that are on the line, this is the executive committee plus a CDE representative. And then the leadership committee is the same exec committee plus one additional representative from each of these partner organizations. And then we have 2 logistics chairs because, as you can imagine, doing 8 to 10 rollouts a year, there's a lot of moving parts to that. And so we have a representative from the County Office of Education in the north, which is San Joaquin County, and then in the south, which is San Diego County Office of Ed. And then we have site leads, which are the county office leads who are hosting the rollouts. And then we have just a cadre of writers and co-writers and read behinds. And these are the people that develop the sessions. And then we have another team of presenters. Some of them are the co-writers and the writers, and some of them are folks who come from the local area in order to build local capacity. And then for the funding, how do we pay for all of this? So all the work, you know, initially especially was voluntary. 90% of it still is pretty much voluntary. County
Excuse me,
offices.
can you go to the next slide, please?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you to go to the next slide. You know, this is work that's considered part of our professional role in our organizations and at county offices. And so there are minimum stipends for writers and co-writers and read behinds, and some clerical support for the hosting county offices of education. But as I mentioned at the beginning, there was no money to do this work. It was just really county offices saying, yep, we want to do it, and our partners in the work saying, yes, we want to be a part of the writing team and the implementation team. But as we have earned some money charging participants, we've been able now to fund some writing stipends and some clerical support. So participants are charged a fee. The fees cover materials and food, and then the profits from each rollout go back into the collaborative to support new rollouts. And then also this 6th rollout, the NGSS one, is partially funded by an Environmental Literacy Creek grant from the Creek Network Budget Act of 2017. Kathy's the next slide.
So can we change the slide, please? Almost. So an important part of the collaborative is the structures that we've used, and some of this you've already heard in terms of how we think about we are actually structured to do the work. So basically what we have, I'm sorry, I think we're still on the same.
Got to go back to the slide before that, Eric. Yeah, there you go.
So what happens in terms of the rollouts is the executive committee and the leadership team has been meeting each year to determine what they thought possible topics might be, and also to decide who writers might be, co-writers, and read behinds. An important part of that is the rollouts have served very practically as a way to do professional development in the state, but I think it's really important to note here that the rollouts have actually been setting the vision for what does the state need to be thinking about in terms of science education. There really is no other mechanism to do that. So when the committee decides what topics are important, it's kind of trying to respond to what the field needs are. So in the beginning, things were very much about awareness. You know, what does NGSS look like in a classroom? But we've pushed ourselves more and more to go deeper and deeper into things like what's the kind of pedagogy that needs to be involved. We've gone beyond we hope principals know something about this to writing sessions that are much more proactive about how important that administrator role is. So picking those topics is key to not only developing a productive rollout, but also helping to push the state's vision about what are the next things that people need to know more about. We also, and you'll see this in a later slide, wanted very much for this professional development to be a chance to build leadership out in the state. And so when the committee and the leadership team gets together and nominates writers and co-writers, They're really trying to say who are people that are stellar around the state that really understand NGSS and can develop high quality sessions. So not only do they know NGSS, but they also understand what we know about the best practices in professional learning. Both the writers and the co-writers attend a 2-day session in which they outline and vet within the people within that group what would make a good session on whatever the topics might be. And then they go off, they write for 2 days, and then they continue writing. They return to a vetting session that is held with the writers, the co-writers, and the read behinds, so that we all get a sense of what each other has done. And there's a lot of corrective action during that vetting session. Sometimes it's just a matter of, oh my God, there's way too much in that session. What do we chop? And other times it's that activity didn't work as well as we thought it would. So what else can we put in its place? The writers go back and then again revise those sessions one more time. And then a very important part, the regional rollouts, select regional people to co-present with the lead writers. And those trainers come to a trainer of trainer session for everybody up and down the state that's going to be presenting at their different rollouts. That again allows a lot of quality control over the sessions and over what the people who are presenting those sessions are supposed to be doing. And then finally, those trainers take it live to their areas, and those presentations are done, as has been mentioned a couple times, somewhere between 8 to 11 rollouts each year, with sessions that have been vetted, presenters that have been trained, and are being mentored by the lead writers who know those sessions uh, uh, with great depth, because obviously they wrote it.
Then, okay, the next slide is Laura.
And so we've alluded to this a little bit, that we really wanted to help build leadership in the state in addition to providing professional development. If you go back to our spinning tops at the very beginning, there's more work than any of us can do individually or even together. And so we need to help build leadership capacity in the state to do that. And so part of that happens at the state level with our collaborative and the work that we do. Then it's still at that state level, bringing regional folks and local people up to become part of the writing team and the co-writers and the read behinds. You're now taking a teacher who might have been a leader at their district level and elevating them to be more involved at the state level. So raising their commitment and experiences in leadership. Regionally, when we do these 10 to 11 rollouts a year, each of those sessions has a very experienced lead presenter, but we want co-presenters in those sessions to help build the local capacity at that region. So county offices of education get to help select teachers who will get trained to become presenters, but are along with us presenting and helping them become leaders, which they can then go back and bring to their school. And so we're really trying very hard to, I won't say trickle down because that doesn't sound intentional, but really try to help build leadership capacity at all levels across the state as we're doing this, knowing that we can't all do it alone.
Okay, and then the next slide is each of us are going to kind of weigh in on this. And the question I'm sure that many of you want to know on the call is, why does this work matter to you as a school board member or to school boards in general? So Kathy, you're the first one.
Sure. When we were all spinning in our own little worlds, even though we played nice with each other, it really was still much more of a competitive nature rather than a collaborative nature. And what we realized is that, as has been said several times, none of us can do this by ourselves. We need the capacity of all of our brains together. GSS is very, very different than what science education was before, and we can only get smarter as a community together. We also realized that in different parts of the state, different capacities existed. Some counties were outstanding, some of them were not. CSP is in some regions, and K12 Alliance is in some regions. Sometimes they're in the same regions. but it's not an even distribution throughout the entire state. And what we learned really quickly was that we would all get better at this if we figured out how to do this together. We would build capacity within our own organizations, but we would also build an incredible statewide network that has the capacity to honestly change how science education works in this state, and that we have the capacity to keep science education on the agenda, even though math will come again and language arts will come again. But we really want to build for collaboration for the best education for all students.
To make this happen, we need lots of people doing this with us. So there are multiple stakeholders. There's the 6 organizations that are in that organized structure that Jane showed you a little while ago. But we also know that behind each of those labels are lots and lots of people. And they all come in at different points. And so we wanted to build this in a way that allowed for early joiners and late joiners, right? As districts some have put off making decisions about science and are just starting to understand NGSS now. They need more the transition into NGSS, while other districts are at the point where they're adopting and piloting materials right now. And so we purposely built the rollout structure so that county offices could offer them multiple times. The materials are available to anyone, so they can use them at the district level after you have somebody who's been trained. So there's multiple people who can be involved in the training and multiple ways that you can enter into this work.
And I think too, the other point about that one is just that if a teacher has a relationship with CSTA, they can get connected to this work through CSTA. Or if they have a relationship with the California Science Project, they can get connected to this work through that. Or if they've dealt with as an early implementer with the K12 Alliance at West Ed, they can be connected to this work. So there's lots of ways for teachers to get involved because there's lots of organizations involved. Number 3 is Maria.
Right, and connecting to what both Laura and Jane discuss about is that we were knowledgeable of the fact that county offices and school districts across the states might have different capacities to support NGSS implementation for their educators. So that's why we have really made a conscious effort to develop and maintain a common high quality message and resources across the entire state throughout all our rollouts. And Jane, you're the last one.
Yes, and the last one is, really from a personal perspective, I wanted to help the folks on the line understand, I was an assistant superintendent in a school district for 10 years prior to this position at the county office. And I know that why I was able to bring resources to my district was because I had a great relationship with the County Office of Education. And when I needed something, I was in a small district, when I needed something, I could get help from the county office. But what I've learned in this relationship is that there are so many other organizations that I could have had a great relationship with that I didn't even know existed. I mean, I was definitely obviously aware of the California Science Teachers Association, but I didn't know that there were resources available through the California Science Project. I hadn't had experience with the K12 Alliance at West Ed. And I think, in the role that I'm in here at the county office, one of the hardest parts for my organization, CIS, the Curriculum Instruction Steering Committee, was to sit back and say to ourselves, there are more students and more classrooms and more teachers than we can ever impact alone as a county office. And even though it is our job and our bread and butter to do professional development for districts, we cannot do this alone. We have to have partners, or we'll never get to every teacher in every classroom in the state of California. And so just as school board members, I want to encourage you to reach out to various organizations and find out what resources are available to your districts. You might start with your county office, but that might not be the only place. And even if you start with your county office may say, I don't have resources in that particular content area, but ask them to find them, to reach out across the state on your behalf and find them, and connect you with organizations that can provide professional development for your students and your teachers. For your teachers, so that they can impact your students. There's just so much work to be done and so many people doing great work. across the state. And, you know, whenever we can, we have to try to do that work together. And the last slide is Maria.
Right. So again, this is a representation indicating the high level of coordination and cooperation across all our organizations. And that's why it would be very easy to figure out who are your next resources available and really dig deeper into what our educators need and keep finding resources that connects all our organization together.
Right, and then we just put a link here to our collaborative, and all of our resources are available there. And, you know, obviously we encourage you to have your districts use them, but we really do hope that in doing so that they reach out to one of the organizations and get some support. Everything is free and everything is meant for people to use, but we do hope that if there's any questions or conversation around the resources, that they feel free to reach out to one of the organizations listed on the slide so that we can provide you some professional support. And we'll take if there's any questions at this time.
Great, thanks so much to all of you. Yes, if you have, if attendees have questions, please type your questions in the question box down there in your little dashboard, and we'll we'll try to answer them. One question I wanted to ask, just starting off, this was a tremendous effort going back 7 years, and a great example of collaboration between all sorts of groups and agencies. What are some of the biggest challenges or roadblocks you faced along this way?
Well, I would say the initial challenge, really, in quite honestly, was having CISC, which is the Curriculum Instruction Steering Committee, really buy into this work. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier, or near the end of the presentation, but, you know, for county offices, working with districts and providing professional development is the main way that an educational services department stays afloat. And so there was some concern and some fear initially on the part of the leadership for CISC that this might be a way for instance, the K12 Alliance at West Ed to get into our districts and start to provide professional development and, you know, undermine the work that we're doing as a county office with the district, or even cut us out of the picture altogether. And I think that once we really were able to talk with the executive committee, and I was lucky enough to be in a role where I was the chair of the science subcommittee and then was selected on exec, it gave me a window to say, look, I can sit down and calculate out all the teachers and classrooms in the state of California, and even in my own region with 14 districts, there's never going to be a time when I can get to all of them. I would have to triple my staff in every content area, and we would never be able to cover that. So I need help. And when we started to have that honest conversation at the executive committee level, and we built these relationships with these incredible women that are on the line with me, and everyone was honest about the fact that their job was not to come in and take work away from the county office, but that the county office was going to be the vehicle to get everyone in the room with districts. And then when that happens, a region often is capable of admitting, I don't have enough staff to cover 14 districts. I can cover 8. And then could you cover 2 others? And more importantly, can we just build capacity in our own regions so that we're not the only ones providing professional development, that it's coming from teachers who have come in and been part of this process and have been trained to be professional developers. And they're out of their classroom for a couple days a year to do that. So that was a big hurdle. And I think that talking it through and being honest, and then showing this what great work we can do together. And no one here on the panel stole work from anybody in the state of California. They just actually increased the amount of services that we could provide to the teachers in California. And then I think the other, just quickly, the other hurdle that we always come across is just the sheer logistics of this undertaking. You know, when I think about, could we do this with every content area? And we should. This should be the way professional development is implemented on every content area across the board. But in order to manage that, you absolutely have to have 5 or 6 people, like the ones on the committee and our partner from CDE, who want to spend a great deal more time on this sometimes than their regular job, and be able to commit weekends and holidays. And we've met on all kinds of occasions in order to get this work done. And so the sheer logistics of it is complicated, but it's really the best way. There's no doubt in my mind, and I've been in education for 30 years. This is my 31st year. This is the best way in order to get standards implementation done. There is no better model. And it just, in order to do this in every content area, we would really have to power up some strong teams for all the other subject matters in order to make this happen.
Great. Another question is, given where we are in the NGSS implementation process, board members, as you know, approve budgets, and so they're going to be hearing about and thinking about adopting instructional materials for NGSS. What advice do the 4 of you have about undertaking this process at the district level?
The very first thing, and I'll let the others jump in, I won't talk the whole time, but the very first thing is, I would say, call your county office of education and find out who has been trained in TIME, the tool for instructional materials and evaluation for NGSS. Someone at that county office has been trained, and if they haven't been trained, someone in your region has been trained, and your county office needs to know who that is. And if they don't get the answer that way, then feel free to contact any one of us, and we can find out who the person in your area has been trained. That particular process for instructional materials evaluation is phenomenal. It's hard, it's long, and it's professional development at its pinnacle. But if you want to really do a good job of adopting instructional materials in NGSS, you have to do it this way. You have to. And it's going to be more than what districts are used to, because, as I've said before, they do a little bit of community input, and then there's a checklist, and the materials either meet the checklist or they don't. In this case, the TIME training is about first understanding the shifts in the NGSS in order to understand how to select appropriate material. Maybe the others want to say something.
And I would just add to what Jane said. When the county offices were trained, they were trained as county partnership teams led by the county office, but they have partners, so that science project people are on there, K12 Alliance people are on there, some science informals are on there. So in addition to the county office, which would know who their team was, you also can reach out to any of those organizations, because they also can help in terms of what the TIME process is all about. And I would just also underscore, TIME is about the evaluation, the selection, and the implementation of the materials. It goes far beyond just selecting the materials. It actually prepares districts to think about, what does implementation mean? Unfortunately, the paradigm, even in the state, is you have materials and now you're done. And what we really understand is we're just really beginning. Materials are the major way in which teachers are going to change practices in their classroom. And that's not going to happen unless they have high quality materials and time will help you really understand whether these materials meet NGSS in name only, or whether they really do push the envelope in terms of the types of thinking that we want kids to be able to do to be the best science students they can be, but more importantly, to be the most important critical thinkers, decision makers, those skills they transfer no matter what curriculum they're doing, no matter what curricular area.
And when you thinking back to math again, and I'm not sure how many people on the call actually had multiple adoptions of instructional materials for math. And we saw that across the state where districts adopted and teachers were not ready to implement and got frustrated with some of the adoptions and what was required in those adoptions, and districts threw those out and started all over again with new adoptions. And we don't want that to happen with science. And so that's why this particular training model is so important, because as Kathy said, it moves into implementation so that when the materials hit the classroom, the teachers actually know what to do with them.
And this question is specifically for Kathy. Would you talk a little bit about what the Early Implementers Initiative has, and for board members that aren't aware what it is and what kind of offerings that you have out there in terms of research?
Sure, I'd be more than happy to. The NGSS Early Implementer Initiative was funded by Bechtel. We are in our 6th year of the funding, 6th and final year. 8 districts were selected from, I think, about 45 that originally applied for the project. They represent districts around the state, rural, urban, suburban, tiny little districts, big districts, Oakland and San Diego being the biggest, Galt and Lakeside being the smallest. It is a K-8 initiative because Bechtel is most interested in that area. The initiative also included 2 charter networks, Aspire and High Tech High, that were funded by the Hastings Quillen Fund, because Trish Williams, who was a state board member that helped this grant be funded, wanted to make sure that charters were able to also participate. The goal of the initiative was really to just say, who wants to be on the bleeding edge of implementation? What can we learn from you bleeding? And what can we share with other districts in terms of thinking about productive pathways towards implementation and avoiding those pitfalls that are not going to get you anywhere along the way? So when you think about this, these districts were incredibly brave. There were no instructional materials. There was no assessment. There was, not even really organized PD to figure out what this was going to look like in their classrooms. But through the years, particularly in relationship to the rollouts, it's been very nice because we've been able to take some of our learnings in the implementation and use that to help build some of the sessions that we've done in these rollouts. So there's been a nice direct correspondence between what we learned and being able to practically put them in the rollouts. We do have an evaluation team that has been writing reports. They're, I think, on their 9th report right now. It's a wonderful collection for anybody who's interested in implementation issues. It addresses things like just how do you do a district plan? What are tools for thinking about professional learning? How does science and English language arts go together? What do we need to think about administrators? A major learning for us in the initiative was, in the beginning, we had 3 administrators on the core team. The core team in each district was about 12 people, 3 administrators, 9 teachers. And we thought that was a really smart thing to do. And within the first year, we realized, oh my goodness, we need way more administrators to be aware of what's going on. So there's quite a bit of evaluation reports about the importance of administrators, not only at the site level, but also in the district level. As I said, the initiative will end in 2020, but those districts have just turned themselves around and are really digging in now for what does sustainability mean when it's not grant funded. And I'm happy to report that all of them have a plan in place that uses general funds to keep science going in their districts, which I think is quite quite a wonderful thing after all of these 6 hard years.
Great. Well, we are almost at time. Is there anything that I should have asked you, or we should have asked you, that you wanted to say a little bit more about this effort?
If it's okay, I'd like to just go back to, we've been practical in terms of doing rollouts, but I do want to go back to the idea of this think tank and a visionary thing for how does science education go forward, because I think it's part of the model that anybody else that's thinking in other content areas, it's like it's a major way to push the state's thinking about what's needed for implementation. And I think the fact that it's been done collaboratively has really brought different perspectives, different ideas, different ways of thinking about it. And I just think that, as Jane said earlier, this is a model that is replicable. I'll go back to our beginning quote. Science educators came together as a small community that cared deeply about the fact that science education was important. And in establishing this collaborative, we have done things that would have never, ever happened in this state for science education if this collaboration had not been done. So I just encourage anybody who's thinking about this in other areas that it's hard work, but it's productive and it's fruitful.
Well, Jane, Kathy, Maria, Laura, thank you so much for giving of your time today. As we said, this webinar will be up within a few days.